This episode, we have special guest Andrew Paulsen, the assistant pastor in Calvary Murrieta, overseeing small groups. Today, Andrew's going to talk about what discipleship looks like for him in this role and how he lives life as a Great Commission Christian, as well as how he represents Christ to non-believers. So, Andrew, why don't you begin by talking about your background a bit?
So my background is, I don't know, I guess everybody in ministry is unique and how they got there and how God brings them there. But my background is I was a high school teacher, right? I'm a social studies teacher and was volunteering at our church. My wife and I both, and I always looked for churches where we could serve at, be part of, not just sit and not do anything else. And so it's interesting how once you start serving in one area, things start to open up and you build trust or relationship, and things kind of lead to new opportunities, and sometimes ones that you weren't expecting or necessarily wanting. But so that's I just was volunteering at our church in different ways, being part of a Bible study, and then helped with family camp, and that's where I really got to know the pastor and his wife through that project, which led to me doing that a second time, helping out at family camp, which led to them asking if I'd be willing to do youth ministry, to do the high school ministry part-time, which was a big decision, kind of a career-altering decision for me and my family. But felt just a lot of things as praying through it, doors opened up in a way where I could do youth ministry and keep my teaching job at a part-time level, and that's been really that started a 7-year process basically of doing high school ministry, and then felt like it was time for a transition, or just was feeling just saw some opportunities and ideas there, and that was also really God thing where I was able to raise up an intern to take over for me, but in that process, our head pastor, Pastor Brian Bell, he wanted to keep me on staff, and was like, I'm not really let you go, is what he said. And I was like, yeah, I think I put a lot of time into this. I don't think I'm ready to let it go either. Like, I've built relationships, I've grown and serving and preaching and things like that. And so he and I kind of brainstormed what other things needed work on at Calvary Murrieta, areas that we had holes in serving our people, and community groups, small groups was the area we both agreed was a real big glaring need. And then that started that journey, and I've been doing that for now 4 years. So that's my ministry background here at Calvary Murrieta. I did a lot of missions trips in college, and served in different campus ministries, and grew up in the church. So serving has always been part of kind of my DNA, my family culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And you said that you were a social studies teacher. So you went to college, correct?
Yes. I went to Paulsen, San Luis Obispo, and got my history major there, and my teaching credential there.
Awesome. And you also taught at the Bible College in Murrieta, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So, as you know, Jacob, the Bible College was in the process of getting accredited, and they needed people who had masters for that process. And I have my master's in leadership and organizational skills, which sounds weird. It's really organizational behavior, but anyway. That's through Azusa Pacific. And so I had my master's, like a lot of teachers do, and I had become friends with Andy Dean, who was over the Bible College at the time, and he would also attend Calvary Murrieta. And so as he was looking to, he had used quite a few of our staff as teachers before at our school, but that was, a lot of them don't have masters. In the Calvary Chapel movement, not everybody had the traditional education background, at least back in the day. And so, but he and I just playing basketball, talking, hanging out and knowing I was doing youth ministry, he's like, "Oh, I need a youth ministry teacher. You have your master's, right?" I said, "Yeah, I have my master's." And he was like, "Hey, would you be willing to do this?" And that was kind of like a bucket list thing. Like, every teacher kind of dreams of, what it would be like to teach at a college or work with, young adults instead of with, teenagers and stuff like that. And so when he offered that, and I looked at the timing and stuff, like, oh, I could do that. And yeah, I'm creating curriculum and creating lessons is totally in my educational background and experience. And so I jumped at that, and I did that 3 times. 3 different sessions, because they don't offer that class every semester at the Bible college. And so I think 3 or 4 times I taught the course. And that was a lot of fun. That was a good experience.
Definitely. Yeah. So why don't you talk about your current work situation and how you are able to disciple people and represent Christ to non-believers, things like that.
Yeah. So my current situation is I oversee a team of volunteers, leaders who are willing to host community groups in their homes or on campus at the church, and guide discussions with people who sign up for to be part of groups at our church. So so in discipling, I meet with my leaders semi-regularly. I check on them, ask them how things are going, whether they can pray. And it's interesting, when you carry the title pastor, it ends up being they want you there for other things, right? They let you know, like, different prayer requests for their family, be there at a funeral, or show up to the hospital, or so there's a lot of ways that it's important life moments or crisis moments, and I don't get as many calls as a lot of the other pastors on staff at our church, but those relationships end up being places where they lean on you in those moments at times, or ask you for prayer, or for help, or for advice. So those are moments where you can speak into people's lives, encourage them, and so that's where I do a lot of my discipling of my team. I also, when we have our team meetings, I try and have a feel for what's going on in the groups, what people are struggling with, what are things going on in our culture, and speak to those in different ways. So the part of my discipling is like educating. Part of my discipling is just walking alongside people and being there for when those moments arrive. I think parenting, I have 2 boys, one's 16, one is 14. I've learned more and more that discipleship requires a lot of availability, which is very hard in our fast-paced American culture, and I'm guilty of that. I'm a very task-oriented, kind of driven person, but slowing down and just walking, like you do in Scripture, slowing down and being available for when those moments arise to speak truth, to be encouraging, to challenge is I think a big thing. And with my bivocational status, I'm not very good at being available, but I try to be, like, show up at the hospital when I know one of my team members is sick or ill, because I have a lot of elderly who are on my team. Or I visit each community group at least once during the session that we're doing, which is usually about 11 or 12 weeks. So going there and seeing and being part of it, and meet sometimes or call. So it's that gentle pursuit of people, checking in on them, and just building that relationship and being available is where you get to have that kind of influence, that discipleship, and then being ready to speak into those situations with them in discernment. And it's not easy, and there's a lot of missed opportunities I know I've had. There's a lot of things where I should have slowed down and not been so eager to speak. But like any relationship, it's up and down. There's mistakes, and there's grace, and there's you just don't let that discourage you or give up, I guess. And discipling is what I try to do. So so that's, and then there's of course also living out your faith in a way and modeling it. But yeah, that's the non-believers, and because I'm bivocational, I'm at a public high school, I have access to a lot of non-believers. There's constraints there. I try and people kind of glean that I'm a Christian in different ways because I host a Christian club in my classroom. Sometimes they'll ask, like, where are you doing this weekend? Oh, I was at church. And then they hear, like, wait a second, you used to do part-time. Why are you doing part-time? Well, I was doing youth ministry. And sometimes that opens doors for questions about stuff. So the hard part is it is so charged right now. Because a lot of times what people want to know is, like, well, what do you think about Trump? Or what do you think about the COVID vaccine? Or what do you think about all these, everything so politically charged? And so I really find myself trying to walk that fine line of, okay, I know they see me as a representative of a strong Christian, as someone who actually serves on staff at a church or has given up a lot of time to be part of a church or whatever they know about my situation. And then my voice almost represents all Christianity to them, which is like, I don't know if I want to get lumped in with it. Like, you think Christian, you think I might be like this type, like, or this type, or that type, and I want there to be more nuance, which is hard. So it becomes very, especially when it's a crowd situation. Usually it's at the lunch table and there's 4 or 5 of us. It's like, what do you think about this, right? And so it's like those, I wish I was more like Jesus, where I could, like, he without sin can cast the first stone type of answer, like really just makes people think and stop in those charged moments. I don't have that gift, or I need to do better at it, develop it stronger. But yeah, there's those times. I have a lot of access to, of course, unbelievers who are youth in my classroom and try and plant nuggets of God's truth in a strategic way or represent Him well in those situations. So, witnessing in my job situation comes with constraints that I have to be careful of going to last a long time there. But yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question completely, but those are some of the scenarios that I played out.
Oh, it definitely does. Absolutely. And so you served in youth ministry before, and now you're serving in community groups. Can you tell me about how you choose and raise up and kind of mentor or teach them? How you raise up people in those communities to be the leaders, either youth leaders or community group leaders?
Well, I believe that there's not one type. I think sometimes it depends on the person. I know some people who have really specific giftings, personality types, whatever word you want to put there, for like, oh, this is the ideal volunteer. This is the type of person we want. And I tend to, push back on that notion. And if I'm much more wise and like, okay, this type could work, this type could work, that type could work. I can have an introvert, I can have an extrovert, I can have high energy, I can have, slow. I think is because at the end of the day, in both youth ministry and in community groups, what my particular ministry is looking for, which is probably different than, like, if I was leading a worship ministry, obviously I need people who have some musical skills, who are comfortable on stage, stuff like that. If they're looking for a pastor to teach, someone has to be able to speak well in front of a crowd to some degree. So there's and be able to craft a lesson, be able to write things like that. But when I'm looking at like youth ministry volunteers and community group people, I need people. We're trying to build relationships, and because there's so many different types of people within churches, types of kids, types of adults, there's a lot of different ways people can connect with others and provide influence. And so I'm not that particular. It's more, again, like I said with the discipling, of walking alongside, equipping and challenging, giving them tips and tricks and how to relate to others. And that's the main thing, is developing relational skills. So for my youth ministry, we would have meetings once a month, and we would go over what things are going on with kids, and I would mainly go over tips on how to conduct their small group facilitating time. Like, okay, you know, and a lot of it I focus on what type of questions to ask, because I'm looking for people who are not trying to talk the whole time, because that's just another, you know, sermon basically, and that's not what we want to do in these small groups or in these connect groups for the youth or whatever we call them. We're looking for people who can facilitate and get them to talk so they participate. And a lot of that is through asking questions and responding in ways that encourages them to tell more. So I do a lot of focus on that and really trying to get people to think about, okay, you need to not talk so much and ask questions. You need to ask not yes or no questions, but questions that are open-ended, that allow people to share different ideas, and how do you positively respond to when they share, and how do you gently, you know, move the conversation away from maybe something that's not so healthy. And so that's what I demonstrate. Like recently I just showed a teaching video from Alpha Course on how a conversation should look in a healthy, you know, group, and they had this like silly like demonstration on this YouTube video that was like a minute long, and I think it helped people to visually see, like, okay, that's the way I want the conversation to go, and help them be more self-aware of when they're talking too much, and then just encouraging them to ask, you know, think about what types of questions to ask. So that's what I do a lot of my focus on, is how to facilitate conversation, how to help people talk and share, how to discern and look at what's going on in their group. Also how to help people share in the leading, like to empower the people to give away their title in a sense, or, you know, give them some responsibilities. So so that's what I do in the developing of leaders. I think it doesn't happen all at once. You have to consistently meet and remind and encourage and learn from them. You know, there was recently a couple who came from one of our, who was attending one of the community groups. They were not leaders, but they came up to me and said, you know, this really helps us, because one of them was an English learner. She's been in America for a long time from Germany, but still struggles a little bit. And she was like, when leaders do this, it really helps me. And I knew there's other English learners in our community groups, and so I passed that tip along to my leaders, like, hey, you know, this woman shared this, and I thought, oh, that's a great point. So I think also being open to suggestions shows that it's a two-way street. I recently gave a message to our whole church body about making disciples. And when I look at Scripture, I see a lot of discipleship is a two-way street. It's mutual discipleship. We learn from each other. Other than, you know, Jesus didn't even learn from us, but you look at, you know, the disciples, Peter, James, John, all of them, they were learning from each other. They were challenging each other. There was a mutual discipleship going on. And then they learned from their churches. You know, Paul was encouraged by the people that he was serving, and they were learning from him. You look at the classic one that I kind of expounded upon was Apollos, and how he learned from Priscilla and Aquila, but then he was the pastor at their church, and they were learning from him, and there was this mutual discipleship going on. There's a give and take, and so I think if you can create a culture when you're leading in ministry in a way with the volunteers that you're serving, is that they teach you and you teach them, you learn from them, they learn from you. That becomes a really healthy learning community, one that will have a nice, healthy growth to it, and also checks on it, right? Because then no one has all the answers. No one is the person where you get all that pride and you know, dangerous situations develop. And so I think you can create a culture that allows for everybody to learn from each other and to be open to suggestions, showing humility that way. I think that's one of the main ways that I feel like I've tried to disciple any of my volunteers that I've worked with, is try and have this give and take, back and forth, empower them to make decisions, give them some ability to make decisions. Because if we're developing leaders, right, if we're developing people to volunteer and to be to participate, which is, I think, a real big need in the American church today. Is instead of being a consumer and just taking, but to participate and give, we have to allow them to make some decisions. People don't, if all they're being told what to do and they don't have any, power to make decisions or to have some control, that's not a lot of fun for people. That feels very robotic, and you grow through making decisions, making mistakes, learning from that, and so being willing to allow that to happen, I think, is important. And so I try and do that in different ways. Like, for instance, recently my community groups, I've been doing this for a while. I've been saying, like, hey, if you guys want to do something other than our basic sermon-based, because our community groups are sermon-based, like they look at questions based on that Sunday sermon. And I was like, if you guys ever wanted to do a curriculum or book outside of the sermons, that's fine. Let me know. Like, I think that could be a fun challenge for some of you, especially if you've been with the same people for a couple of years. And two of them have done that this spring. I have one doing a book by Francis Chan, Crazy Love, this classic, and then another one doing a classic marriage series. And just to see them kind of take ownership and run with it is pretty cool. And that helps them grow in their leadership, helps them meet new challenges and talk through things. So I think part of it, like when Jesus sent out the 72, right, or sends out the disciples 2 by 2, there's this part of like, let them go make mistakes, let them go do things, take risks, and grow in that, learning to, not just follow the recipe that you've set. And that creates then opportunities for them to come to you with questions. Oh, we're having trouble with this, or we're trying to figure this out. What do you think about this? So it's through that, like for my secular education, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, we have a slogan, learn by doing. And I think that applies a lot to Christianity too. You learn through doing, if that makes sense. You grow through activity.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we talk some more about some of the lessons that you've learned through doing youth ministry and through doing community groups. So what are some victories that you've found in those areas?
I would say one of the cool things, like, I think the thing that gives me the most joy, and again it comes back to being a teacher at heart, a coach at heart, is seeing people try something that worked, right? That they came back energized, kind of like when the disciples come back and we saw this happen, and this happened, Jesus, right? It's those moments that really give you a charge. So whether it be like seeing some kids at camp or at a missions trip really go like, I think God's calling me to do this, or I'm excited about this. I had some kids who were, one that sticks out. I had 2 girls who were just starting in high school. They were, they had been coming their freshman year, now it's their sophomore year. And I think as a leader, I try to have like discernment, looking for the holes and the gaps in my ministry, and not rush to fill them, but be praying, okay, God, when the opportunity arrives, please help me, fill in this gap, fill in that. And I wanted to see more student leaders on the stage, but not every kid is comfortable on stage or wants to be on that. And, you force a kid up there and they do it and then they feel stupid, and I don't want to do that again, and it backfires, right? You don't want to give that kind of situation. But I could tell these 2 girls might be comfortable doing some more on stage, like announcements and being like the face of the youth group for a little bit. And there were 2 kids that I felt I could really do. They had good character and I could trust in that situation. And so I just tell them, like, hey, what if you guys did the announcements this way? And one tried it and the other one tried it, like, how'd that feel? It felt pretty good. And like, okay, well, what if you 2 guys kind of teamed up and like you guys you kind of be the announcement team and have fun with it, and we'll just talk about it, growing it. I'm not an expert, but let's see what happens. And they ended up having a blast for the next 2.5 years doing it. And now one has been serving as an adult leader in the youth group for the last 3 years. The other one is an intern at our church. Her, probably Eden O'Donnell. And they have a lot of other adults pouring into them. I'm not saying I get any credit for that, but it's those moments when you put out a challenge and you let a kid run with it and see what blossoms from it, right? Seen that with like kids with their music talent. See that with kids with just working with youth. It's you give them if you create a culture where it's good to take risks and they're not going to be criticized or hurt for failing. It's interesting to see what blossoms out of there, and so so those are like some of my leaders, right? Encouraging them to try this or try that, and see them go on to serve in different careers, like being social workers or continue to serve in the church in different ways, and because they discovered they enjoyed serving, they enjoyed using their gifts for God in different ways. That part really excites me, and so and seeing those kind of victories there. With my community group leaders, similarly, what I love is seeing, like, I try and put out there, hey guys, as you develop these relationships with these people in your groups, they might want to do things outside, like go to barbecues or go do like a community service project together, and to see some of the groups really run with that, where like they go to each other's birthday parties. Another one I saw where they serve regularly at a homeless ministry in Lake Elsinore and show up and help participate and do different things. And some of these are like elderly people in these community groups. They're like 60 or 70, where a lot of times you're like, I've been there, done that, I want to do that stuff. But they're still serving, they're still participating with their gifts, making the impact on the community around them. And so you throw out suggestions. Not everyone's going to take it, but to see some, like, okay, I'm going to take that risk and take that chance, and then they go like, I like that, I want to do more of that, or participate in stuff like that. They catch the joy of serving through those opportunities. And so those are some of the things that I've really enjoyed watching people using their own gifts and creativity and time and energy, and see what happens, And I love that, I didn't necessarily create it or God didn't even think of it. It's just more creating a space and place for them to experiment. I think you probably remember this from my class, maybe not, but I often would say ministry is like a laboratory. A lot of people don't like that. I shouldn't say a lot, but some would be like, well, it's not so messy. I'm like, in some ways it is. And then we don't totally know. We just go out there and we do stuff and see what God does with that, right? And then if it didn't work, okay, that didn't mean that we were wrong. We tried something, didn't pan out. That's okay. We'll try something else again. Instead of taking it as like a failure, like, oh man, we totally did things wrong. We should never do something like that again. No, we were experimenting. We were trying. We were taking a risk, and see what happens. So, and let you kind of do something and see what God does with it. And I think that's exciting to see different leaders, different kids, different people take that risk. Another one, of course, is exciting is to see people who are part of community group then say, hey, I want to host. I want to be a leader now. And that is cool to see them want to take another step forward. Especially this one couple who he didn't grow up in the church. He was hurt by the church for a period of time, partly because of his own, he had an unhealthy marriage and ended up getting a divorce, and he would own that. Like, it was a lot of it's on him. But through that process, he was like, he didn't really didn't want to go to church again. He gets remarried to this other woman who did not grow up in the church, but she, through some different challenges and stuff, ends up exploring Christianity, coming to Jesus and says, hey, I think we should go to church together. And he was like, oh man, I was hoping to get away from that. The last wife I had, we did the church thing and it blew up. Like, I don't want to do this. But then he starts coming with her, and they have a sweet experience in one of my community groups, and then wants to lead. And they're doing a great job. There's this beautiful authenticity to them. They don't do everything perfectly. They still have some rough edges, of course, but they're learning and growing in a way that's very genuine. And so I think, again, creating that space and place to see what God does and allowing the imperfect people to still serve, instead of looking for that perfect servant, which it doesn't exist, but and just walking alongside them and seeing what happens is, I think, really exciting.